Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, Simon and I spoke to magazine writer and author Ed Caesar.
We're backstage recording this intro at the British Book Awards, which accounts for any odd noises, but it was a great interview with Ed. We talked about his career, starting off working for British publications and then moving to American publications, including The New Yorker and The New York Times Magazine. And we also talked about how he juggles his writing work with his family commitments.
Enjoy.
Ed, thanks so much for coming in and coming down. It's brilliant to have you on the show. Can we start a bit with talking about when and how you decided to become a magazine writer as opposed to another form of journalist or maybe another form of writer?
Sure. I was at the Independent for a while and was doing features there and didn't know very much about journalism, to be honest, when I started. So I was trying to work out what I wanted to do. And I knew that I really, really loved being a journalist. But I wasn't sure that what I was doing at that point, which was basically writing, turnaround features on the day, was going to be endlessly satisfying. And I had some really amazing editors. I had Adam Lee and Ruth Metzstein and Joe Ellison, who were all really encouraging about, people being ambitious. And they used to push across the desk all this cool stuff that I'd never seen before, American stuff mostly. New York Times Magazine, The New Yorker and The Atlantic and Vanity Fair. And they used to say, you should read this stuff. This is great.
In physical hard copy?
Physical hard copy, which was how we rolled back in 2004. I mean, it was online, but they used to get all this stuff into the office. They used to, I don't know quite how it worked, but you used to get 20 magazines on the desk. And so they sent me this stuff to read. We'll put it on my desk, and we'd all talk about it. And I remember being really, really taken by, some of the stuff that I was reading. I was like, this is just so much more vivid and ambitious than the stuff I was doing.
Is there a piece in particular that struck you?
Yeah, Sebastian Junger wrote this piece. I think it was called Blood Oil.
About Nigeria, or
about Nigeria, yeah. And it was about this group called the Movement for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta, who used to daub paint on themselves and have this very kind of arresting sort of aesthetic, but were, in some people's eyes, terrorists who were blowing up pipelines because they disagreed with the distribution of oil wealth, and in some people's eyes, kind of freedom fighters. And this piece was not only just a really captivating and I thought quite physically brave account of someone going upriver to meet these guys who'd kidnapped a lot of people, but it was also this explanation of about why this particular conflict that maybe you might not have heard of was the key to understanding what was happening to oil prices and so it had this micro and macro explanatory pull. The writing was really clear and
do you think
crisp.
That was the first piece, because you obviously went on to do a bit of war reporting yourself in the Congo, and was that the first kind of inspiration?
I think I was interested in the idea of doing stuff that got me a long way from an office.
Yeah.
And that seemed to be one of those. I think my interest in East and Central Africa is more to do, my mum grew up there. I was always interested in Kenya.
Yeah.
My dad was my grandfather was in the British Army in Kenya.
Okay.
So he fought against the Mau Mau in Kenya, which I now realise is this kind of problematic moment in British colonial history, which I'm hoping to dig into in the future. And I've just got a load of his diaries and so on, So, but my interest really came from having family and people that I knew who had lived in Africa a long time. But I just saw in this kind of work, and the more you read it, it's sort of addictive. You keep on diving deeper and deeper. Not just the war reporting stuff, but there was a book of New Yorker profiles that I then got given called Life Stories, and this amazingly witty, brilliant profile of Johnny Carson by Ken Tynan. There's a party tonight at the house of Swifty Lazar, agent of doyens and doyen of agents. I think it starts. It's something like that. Anyway, this is house in Malibu where it all starts. And all of this stuff just seemed so vivid and ambitious. And I thought, why can't I do that? And the reason why I couldn't do that was because it didn't really exist here. It doesn't really exist here. But over the period of about 2 or 3 years at The Independent, I think I made a conscious decision that that's what I wanted to do.
And when did you realise you were actually really good as a journalist and that you could actually make your career?
I'm not sure I've realised yet. No, honestly, like I was just, because I was coming in today, I reread a couple of old pieces and I thought, how did any of this get in?
What, because you don't think they're good?
No, I just feel like every time I read, I hate reading stuff that's already been published. I find it really difficult because I have this kind of junky scratch for the editor's pen, and I find the whole bits that I'd rewrite, and I just find it really difficult to read anything that I've ever written before. And so I was given a lot of encouragement at The Independent that I had promise, which I think was true and remains true.
Had you had kind of earlier literary ambitions? Had you ever wanted to be a poet or a screenwriter?
No, I'd written a lot.
You did want to be a screenwriter?
Yeah, I wanted to be a screenwriter. I had spent a very happy 3 months in LA just before I went to university, and in the week I was working for a Republican think tank.
Okay.
They were really, really like far out right wing, and I disagreed with almost everything that they stood for, but was kind of fascinated by the thought processes and the kind of the sort of political science. So that was my life during the week in East LA in Claremont McKenna College, and then at the weekends I had a really good friend from home who was kind of making it as a screenwriter in Hollywood, and I would go to these fabulous parties where there were baths full of ice with champagne bottles in it.
Amazing.
And would talk to him about his life, and everyone would be talking about like hot scripts, and they would talk about ideas and pitch stuff, and it was all like Swingers, that the movie Swingers with Vince Vaughn.
Yeah.
It felt very much like that. It was so fun and enticing, and I thought, oh, that sounds quite cool. And because I'd always written, I'd written some fairly unreadable poetry as a teen, some
we've all been there.
Some stories, and I had this idea that I wanted to write, and I was very into American fiction. Deep, like I thought probably where this is all going to end up is I'm going to write a really brilliant novel. But as soon as I entered a newsroom for the first time, I thought, these are my people. I just like, you've been in newsrooms. They're good people. It's fun. It's the wit is bleak and, really, it just pulls you in. People know stuff. I remember being at The Independent when I was there, and there were just all these people around who had these kind of repositories of arcane knowledge. There was a trade unions correspondent. I remember it was such a kind of quaint idea of this trade unions correspondent. But he knew, if he wanted to know anything about trade unions, he had to ask Barry Clement, because he knew all about it. And he knew it. And that's what I loved. There were all these people who, and a lot of them weren't necessarily sort of university smart or whatever. You didn't have to have that kind of sort of, Oxbridge or whatever, background. People who'd spent a lot of shoe leather.
So why did you decide to leave that environment then? Leaving the kind of institutional
I just fancied doing some ambitious writing, and there was only, really the only place that I could see a way to do that was to do it in America. So I thought, well, the way to do this is to get good enough clips that I can somehow take there at some future point. It wasn't a fully fleshed out idea.
Yeah, how kind of preconceived was this when you were like 26, 27 when you left the Indie? Did you think like,
yeah, definitely,
I want to go and make this work?
Yeah, it was really I was really set on it, And so I got a contract writing magazine features for the Sunday Times magazine, which I thought would be a kind of a stepping stone in some way, which it sort of was. You know, it wasn't a totally unambiguous success, that little period of my life, but it taught me a lot.
Why not?
Just because I felt like, I don't know, it's, you know, I think that was a period in which all magazines were really, British magazines particularly, were considering, like, do we really want to run 5,000 words on something, or do we want to run, 2,000 words on something? And inevitably it was going shorter and slightly less, atmospheric and deeply reported, and all the things that I was interested in doing just ran slightly counter to what magazines, and that magazine in particular, were doing. Which is not to say that I didn't do work that I was proud of, but I felt like I was fighting a bit against a culture, and I was not really going to win that. So, and also, it kind of went south for me. I had a friend there who, Amy Turner, who, just after I left, she killed herself, and I remember her being really unhappy when I was there at the end there, and all of these things in my mind have kind of coloured it as a slightly, it was slightly soured. And at that point, while I was still at the Sunday Times magazine, I had started doing some things for GQ, which were much more like the things that I wanted to do. And that was a kind of fabulous space for me to be able to try some stuff out, like try some big ideas, and see what could happen. And, in the same way that my editors at The Independent were really keen for me to read and sort of drink in all this great stuff. Alex Bilmes, who's now editor of Esquire, was my features editor at GQ, and he used to send me stuff as well. And we used to talk about ideas in a really interesting and productive way. So,
at what point did you realise that you were becoming well known as a writer and editors were coming to you rather than you just pitching to them?
I mean, it hasn't happened until I'd say quite recently. So I would say, I got offered the job at the Sunday Times, but off the back of an award. So that was someone coming to me. It was, in fact, Robin Morgan, who's the editor of the Sunday Times magazine, stood next to me at the urinals, at the British Press Awards, and sort of talked to me about coming to the magazine. It was a really awkward, moment. I suppose the feeling is when you get a couple of pieces that land. Like I had a couple of pieces, both for the Sunday Times magazine and for GQ, that really landed.
What were they?
There was a piece about the Congo for GQ, which was one of my first things for them.
With the massacre in the village?
Yeah.
The shoeless headmaster?
Yeah, the shoeless headmaster. Good memory. Good reading. So that was, good preparation. So that landed, and people were like, oh, okay, that's sort of, it was really hard to do. That trip was sort of nightmarish at times, but that kind of stuff gets you a certain reputation. People who come to you,
and also, I see, were there not that many people willing to do that kind of risky work?
Yeah, I think that was it. I was willing to do it. I was, obviously quite ambitious for what I wanted to happen in terms of stories. Like I didn't want to go to Congo and file 5 news pieces.
Did it feel kind of not on a risk thing, but kind of isolated, doing this stuff in Britain where there's not really a tradition of doing it?
Yeah.
Did you feel you kind of lacked peers, as it were?
At that stage, I did feel like I lacked peers. I really did. I felt like there was no one else doing it. There was no one else who could tell me what to do.
Did you feel you had mentors in place?
Well, no, I didn't really.
Yeah.
At that point, sort of end of, I can't really remember. I was trying to think about this. I can't really remember my 20s. I don't know what happened. But yeah, I do remember that feeling of not really having people to tell me what to do. I think, I'm trying to remember what the timeline is, but like Sam Knight is about my age. And we would do, after about 2010, 2011, I got the feeling that there were at least like two of us trying to do this similar kind of thing. And, it helps that we get on really well. And so we could talk to each other on occasion about what it's like. And we still go for the occasional Pizza Express to talk through stories and stuff. And
was that an easy relationship? Was there ever a kind of competitive?
I definitely think we sometimes, like, at the beginning at least, we were like, is there enough room for both of us?
Did you ever find yourselves after the same story?
Not really. No.
I mean, I always think it's not a zero sum, right? It's not like
it's not zero sum, and and it helps. I think that Sam is like a generous and collegial dude who is very, I think he realized perhaps earlier than I did that it's not zero sum. I think at times when there's been other shit going wrong with my life, and I haven't had a good year, I sometimes feel anxious about the fact that there are other people doing this work. When I'm feeling good about myself, I'm very generous, and
it's a work in progress. Right?
It's hard.
Do you get approached from young would-be long-form writers for advice, or do you feel like it's kind of
sometimes
young
sometimes
not interested in that anymore?
Sometimes.
Okay.
And
what do you tell them?
I don't know. What do you tell a coal miner going into 1975 coal mining? I don't know. No, that's not quite right. But I try to say that it's taken me a long time, not just to do the kind of work that I want to do, but also to get better at it. That it's not just a question of stretching your word count. It's to do with a set of skills and a series of judgments that you make about how stories work. And
what do you still find difficult? Because everyone reading your pieces would assume that it comes, so naturally to you. Is there anything that you still struggle with when you're writing long form that you have to work on?
Everything.
What?
Everything. It's really hard.
The thing I find interesting about long form is it's like the full court press, right? You've got to do everything. You've got to do the reporting. You've got to do the writing. You've also got to sell the thing often. It's like stretching a whole set of really quite different muscles into a Gesamtkunstwerk.
I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
Like a total artwork.
Okay. I learned something.
From Wagner. I was going to say the thing we always ask about on the show is money, and how people piece their writing lives together. And at that early stage when you'd left the indie, you were on contract at the Sunday Times.
I was,
right?
yeah.
How did you kind of piece your life together?
I'm trying to remember. I think what happened was I joined the Sunday Times on the understanding that I would do 7 magazine pieces a year. I can remember this now. And something like 26 pieces a year for News Review.
Okay.
And a certain amount for Culture. It was obviously, in retrospect, ridiculous. I was never going to do that. It was really that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of work.
And it didn't work at all. And News Review was a sort of unambiguous nightmare because I didn't want to do the stuff that they wanted me to do in the way that they wanted me to do it. And also, I didn't have time because I was much more interested in these 7 magazine pieces, which, by the way, was probably too much anyway. And the whole thing, I'd taken on too much because I thought because my word rate was, low comparatively, and I felt like I needed to accept that number of things in order to get paid what I needed to be paid to live in London and do all that stuff. So the only way I realized to make the things that I wanted to do work was to raise my word rate. So I just made this decision, right, less for more. Find the places where you can get paid a bit more. At that time, GQ was one of those places. And eventually you get into this nice, rhythm of doing a certain amount of stuff for more money. And that's the only way the sums have to add up somehow.
Do you find that you can't really take work for British publications anymore because they just pay so much less than US.
I mean, I don't do it
because they can't pay.
That's the main reason. I think if you're going to do what I do now, which is maybe 3 or 4 magazine pieces a year plus books, they've got to pay some money.
Did you do other work, non-journalistic work, editing or things around the side to make it pay?
No. And in fact, I always felt like you just have to take yourself as seriously as you can within the parameters of your finances. So if I said to myself, right, I'm going to try and do this work as well as I can, it has to be a full-time gig. Like, so if I'm having a really bad time, I'm just going to have a bad time.
Can you tell us your word rate?
Now, in US publications in general, I get about $3 a word. But that varies. It depends what you're doing, and that's not totally unusual.
No, that's quite.
That's what Katie Weaver's on as well.
But that may change. It depends who you're working for. It depends what kind of relationship you have with the magazine. You know, if you get a contract somewhere, you might get a higher word rate. You know, this is all part of this weird little dance that you have with publications.
And you decided not to live in London, right? Or you moved out of London?
I did move out of London. End of 2014.
Okay.
So our second kid was just on the way. So my wife is a criminal barrister, and I wasn't doing very much work in London, I realised. And it always stressed me out how expensive it was to live. And my line of work isn't particularly... well, it's not reliable. You know, I didn't have steady income. So I thought we could maybe have a really good life, both of us. Her practice would work really well up there. She's from the Northwest. I could do my magazine work perhaps with slightly less pressure, make slightly better choices. You know, maybe do one less magazine story a year, but do like 3 amazing magazine stories. So that was the calculus, is that, you know, you want to give your children the, you know, nicest life that they can. I was not going to do that.
How tricky has it been balancing that family life when your recent piece about the lost aircraft carrier for the New York Times?
Yeah.
You were away for 22 days at sea or something, you said?
It was a long time, yeah.
Yeah, so, and I assume when you're out reporting kind of war torn areas, you're away for longer. How draining is that in terms of balancing?
Yeah, it's hard. No, it's really hard. It's really hard. And so, for instance, when I went on the ship, Chloe was in a murder trial. She was defending a murder, someone who'd been accused of... Actually, no, it was an attempted murder. She was defending someone who'd been accused of an attempted murder. And that's a really serious thing. And she's working really hard, and barristers work really late as well. You know, they come back and then they've got all this stuff to go through. You know, she's a proper, super accomplished, brilliant barrister. And, you know, the kids have to get to school and eat, and it's quite nice to see them occasionally. And in order for that to work, I had to kind of think, well, okay, I've got to be on this ship for however long, and we're just going to have to get like one more person to help us out. So I built it into my deal with the New York Times. I was like, right, you're going to have to pay me more, because I didn't say this because I need childcare, but I said you're going to have to pay me more because it's just a huge commitment of time and whatever. And I spent another £700, £800 or something on someone to come and help in the mornings and the evenings with the children. And it's not perfect because you miss your children or whatever, but that's this kind of stuff that you have to think about all the time. It's like playing a game of 3-dimensional chess. You know, we have these like diary meetings where we're just trying to work out.
You and your wife?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, we have this diary meeting. It's just trying to work out, like, okay, I need to be in, I don't know, Kigali for 2 days or something to do something for work. But I can't do it then because there's other things happening. Most of the time it's totally fine because we're, both, reasonable people and try and make it work. But sometimes we're on Virgin trains that pass each other at about crew and sort of wave out the window. If one of the trains breaks down, the kids aren't getting picked up from school. It's really...
And what about more emotionally in terms of kind of when you've gone to kind of risky jobs abroad? Yeah. Has she ever said, I don't want you to do this?
No, she never said that, but I felt it.
And if she did?
She would never say that.
Beyond the sort of the pragmatic calculations, did it feel being kind of outside the London journalistic literary milieu, was that helpful? Did you ever feel you missed that in terms of where you were basing your writing life?
Truthfully, I do not miss it at all. I've never been happier than just working, and I don't miss talking to other journalists at parties. I love other journalists. I see them occasionally, but I don't miss being in the mix down here. Really sounds really callous, but I really love my work. That's the thing that's appealing to me about all this stuff. I skip out of bed and I think, yes, I've got this really cool story that I'm working on, and I get to talk to a load of people about it today, or I get to write this thing, or I'm working on a draft or something. It's not always as joyful as that, but I do actually really love doing the thing that I do.
Can we talk about some of these specific
pieces? Yeah, let's do it.
So first of all, the tennis story, which I really enjoyed. And this came when you were in that kind of Sunday Times GQ mix, 2011, 2012?
Yeah, I think the reason why I sent that to you was because I think it's one of those stories that shows, it is far from perfect, but it shows the thing that I was trying to do something ambitious. And
do you want to just explain what it is for listeners?
Yeah, so it's a story about the longest tennis match ever played at Grand Slam. Longest tennis match ever played, I think, at all, which was between Nicolas Mahut of France and John Isner of America. And it went on for 11 hours over 3 days, and it finished 70-68 in the final set. And the reason why it's interesting is not because it's long.
In games, right?
In games, 70-68 in games in the final set. And the reason why it's so interesting is that these two guys basically fell in love during this tennis match. That they went through something so remarkable together. They couldn't beat each other for 3 days. That it forged this psychic bond. There's something just completely fascinating about that. And so I had read, like probably most other journalism students, I'd read Levels of the Game by John McPhee, which is about the 1968 US Open semi-final between Clark Graebner and Arthur Ashe. And it's a dual profile. It's a profile of both players, but told through this game. And I was actually, as conscious of it as this, I was looking for a tennis game to just try and do the same thing.
Did you have the Foster Wallace tennis pieces in mind as well?
I was, well...
Like string
yeah,
theory.
I had read them, but I was, and they're all sort of amazing in their own way, but I'm never ever going to write like David Foster Wallace. That wasn't really, and it's not a kind of achievable model for me. What seemed much more interesting to me was just this deeply reported thing that John McPhee did about who these two players are. The great thing in the Levels of the Game is Arthur Ashe, who's this kind of, like languid, beautiful African-American, Democrat voting guy is, he plays kind of Democrat tennis. He's sort of freewheeling, whatever, laissez-faire. And Clark Graebner, who's the sort of country club Republican, plays this kind of quite stiff Republican tennis, which I thought was just really funny and really but Mahut and Isner are not dissimilar figures, and it's so I just found there was something really appealing about just
Which one was it who was like at Georgia Tech with lots of like pretty girls and parties?
Yeah, Isner. So and also not not, to be sniffed at, I got to go to the Delray Beach Open in February, to Miami. Lovely. And I went to the Tennis Club de Paris to go and talk to Nico Mahou. And it was all just kind of totally fascinating and joyful. But I think the reason why I sent it to you was, I think it gives you an indication of how self-conscious I was about trying to do this. I was trying to try out these modes of writing, not successfully, but you can at least sense in that piece the kind of, I was ambitious to do a certain kind of writing. And in fact, you learn something. You learn a lot every time you do something like that.
The second piece you sent us was, I think, the first piece you ever wrote for The New Yorker.
Yeah.
About London's largest
It's about a big
mansion.
house.
Yeah. And actually, I remember you talking about it at the Well Told Festival years ago.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember the idea for the story came not because you were going to write a story about it, but you just toured the house.
I did tour the house.
And then it became a story.
Yeah.
As a potential buyer.
Yeah, well, I had, as most freelance journalists do, I had 30 million burning a hole in my back pocket. No, I was doing a story about the Bishop's Avenue, which is this crazy row of mostly empty houses, very big houses in Highgate, Hampstead, for the Sunday Times, and the estate agent said, let's just go and have a look at something really cool, because Whittenhurst was on, he was on his books, and so we went and looked around Whittenhurst. It wasn't part of my story. We were just looking around it because it was cool and it was empty and.
This is in Highgate.
In Highgate. And then I'd been talking. So an editor at the New Yorker had been talking to me about doing something for the magazine, and wanted me to do something about property in London. He said, "It's really interesting, is it not, that London's been kind of subjugated by all this Russian and Middle Eastern money?" I said, "Wow, it's kind of, that's always been the story of London property, but it's kind of more so now." And he said, "Oh, okay, well, let's get a sense of like he was interested in iceberg houses and all that stuff. You're a very smart guy. Imagine that, having that idea about a city that's not yours and how interesting it is." Anyway, so I said, "Wow, there is this big house and no one knows who owns it. It was bought in 2008, and at that stage it was 2014."
And you'd visited it by that
point.
And
I'd visited it in 2000, whatever it was, 6 years ago. And it had been sold just after I visited it, but no one knew who owned it. I was like, it's really weird, isn't it? This thing, refurbishment would be going on for 4 or 5 years, and still nobody knew who owned it. And all these rumors, it's Putin's, it's the mayor of Moscow's wife, it's whoever it is. And I said, well, if I can find out who owns it, is that a story? He's like, yeah, but you have to find out. It was just.
So you didn't have a commission?
I did have a commission.
Okay.
It was a commission piece, but he said the piece only works if you know who owns it.
Okay.
So it's commission with a pretty high bar to publication.
And how much time had passed at this point between you leaving the Independent thinking, I want to make it in American magazines, and you getting that commission?
7 years.
Yeah.
But I'd done stuff for the New York Times before.
Okay.
And the Atlantic. So I'd had a couple of big stories published in the New York Times magazine.
And had you gone to New York to meet them? How had you done that thing of kind of breaking,
getting
American editors?
So I would go stay on a friend's sofa, buy the cheapest ticket I could, went and stayed on a friend's sofa. I went around, saw any editor who would see me. Great thing about Americans in general, I find, is that they like people who are ambitious. So, some kid you've never heard of with a stupid accent turns up in a salmon pink shirt, and they give you the time of day, which is not necessarily something that would happen in London, I don't think.
No.
And so, I got a meeting at the New York Times magazine. Amazing. Someone took me out for lunch. I got a meeting with an editor at the New Yorker. It's ridiculous.
Which editor was that? Is it your?
It's my editor. Yeah, Daniel Zaleski.
Oh yeah.
So, I got a meeting. It's
And how did that meeting then turn into you actually sending? Did you?
Well,
send him
I
ideas?
sent him ideas.
How many no's did you get before you got a yes?
Many. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, more than a few.
And what is your pitching strategy? I mean, another New Yorker writer, Patrick Keefe, who's very gracious with me, his rubric, which I often use, is 3 paragraphs and 500 words as a pitch. What's your sort of...
I don't. Yeah, I tend to not. I tend to try not to pitch by email very much.
Oh, really? Okay.
Email's such a dysfunctional mode of communication, I think. And it's because it's so ignorable and people get so much of it.
So do you phone them up, or is it?
So I say, I've got a couple of ideas. If you had 5 minutes in the next week or so, can we jump on the phone?
I think a lot of writers are just so afraid of rejection that at least if it's via email, they can deal with it a bit more. It must be difficult going to a meeting and having every piece.
Well, you have to get rid of that.
No.
Don't you find that there's a risk that something can be like, because I've never pitched face to face. Well, I've had meetings to pitch, but I often find that, like, if you say someone with an idea and you're there in person, you're asking for kind of a verdict immediately, and it's much easier to say.
Yeah, no, you say no, but the understanding is just let that sit with you for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then quite often they'll say, okay, do you want to just write that second one down? Yeah. And then I'll formulate something, more, it's written, it's on paper, not very long still. But I quite like, I'm weird, I think, probably, in that I quite like talking on the phone. People who are 10 years younger than me, they think I'm a psychopath. Why do you keep calling me? I said, because I work on the basis that, like, a meeting is better than a phone call, and a phone call is better than an email, and an email is better than whatever. Part of the trick I'm starting to realize with reporting is that what you want, the situation that you want by the time you get into, like, the last 3 weeks of a piece, is a situation where you could call any of your sources that have helped you, and they would tell you all this detail that you haven't got already, that you could keep on going back to people again and again.
But what about the getting kicked out of the taxi questions, the time when you have to present the difficult stuff, that kind of thing? How do you factor that in? I mean, I see that as a very desirable model to achieve, but, like...
But I think even people who are hostile to you, like, I think if they've seen the whites of your eyes a bit. So this is my point. The point is that if you forge some kind of connection, which is very hard to do on electronic communication, you need to forge a human connection with people before they're willing to get into the nitty-gritty with you. And I cannot see that changing. It's really difficult to get people to tell you interesting stuff unless they've got some kind of sense of who you are.
But say with the Wittenhurst piece, at the end of that, when it's 3 weeks to close, do you have nice chatty conversations with the Russians? Or what's going on at that stage?
Well, I'd spoken to 150 people, so that's...
But the principles, though...
Yeah, the principle's the same, though. Even people who are somewhat antagonistic to me, okay, so it's not the Russians themselves. However, their lawyers know who I am. The architect has got a really good sense of who I am. Even if it's somewhat antagonistic, we can still go back and forth. It's not silence. And I think so some of reporting is just getting what you can. But if you get what you can and then there's an Ed Caesar-shaped hole in the wall and you never hear from me again, that's ultimately not going to be very helpful, because you need to be able to keep on having a conversation.
Did you ever hear indirectly from Andrei Guriev? Is that how you...
I heard directly. I heard directly.
Really?
Well, I say directly as an oligarch gets, which is through his lawyers. They were quite upset about the whole thing.
Could you have updated
but
the piece?
This is what I find fascinating, because they, this mix of you saying that it's very zen and everyone stays chatty with you, and you're, like, being lawyered by an oligarch.
But he was the owner of the house.
He was the owner of the house.
You didn't
I didn't talk to him. No, I didn't talk to him.
So
I'm talking about the people that I do talk to in the story.
Yeah.
They need to keep on talking to you. in fact, there is a weird dissonance, I will grant. There's a dissonance between sometimes quite often you're revealing information that people do not want to be revealed.
Yeah.
But you keep on saying to them, listen, the train's leaving the station and you're either going to be on the train or you're not on the train.
But that's the profiler's turn idea, that you talk to your subject and they tell you their version of events. You then go and talk to your 30 other people and you then come back to the subject and compare their take with them, and then it's then in their interest to tell you the rest. I mean, I suppose what I find interesting is, I totally agree that you should do it in as civil a way as possible, but it's still potentially quite brutal process, right? As you say, the train has...
Yeah, I don't take it personally. I think the point about all this stuff is when people are angry about it, it's not you that they're angry with.
What did the lawyers say? Did they...
Oh, he... A lot of their problems were with the fact that I don't own the house. I own this trust that owns the house and intend to use it for myself. It was this sort of weird circumlocutions that they felt were important. But if you buy a house through a trust and then you live in it, it's your house. And they were upset about all the detail that I'd got from other people about what it looked like. And
gosh, it must have been strange him reading that.
Really weird.
Yeah.
But then I think, he's got 4 billion, so I'm not going to cry.
Talking a bit more of technique and, the subject of your piece, maybe feeling a bit odd when they read what you've written about them. You did a piece for Esquire about George Osborne.
Yeah.
And it begins by saying, little after 6:30, every weekday morning, George Osborne takes the bus from Notting Hill, goes to Lyon for breakfast, and there's all this kind of minutiae about his morning routine. How did you get that? Were you following him around?
I did not follow him. I'm not going to reveal sources, but that is extremely well sourced.
Do you have a mole in Lyon?
It's an extremely well sourced. It's an extremely well sourced bit of description. That.
Do you know what breakfast he got? You don't say it in the piece.
I think it changed.
Oh.
I don't think he gets the same one every day.
I guess Lyon has different specials every day.
Breakfasts. So.
So you never tried to follow him.
I never tried to folw George Osborne. I can say that. I say that categorically. I've never followed the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, nor would I want to. I do know from various good sources that I have for that piece that he was not unhappy with that piece.
Interesting.
How it turned out.
Does that matter to you?
No, I just find it interesting, an interesting sort of study in power and image.
And what did it feel like writing about the press specifically?
It was great. It was so fun. It was really, really fun. I loved doing that piece. It was just, it felt joyful. I don't know. Because
it was perfect timing as well.
It was just.
Everyone was so fascinated.
The whole story from soup to nuts. That one was just really, really fun.
It's got that line like, "He is still a politician."
Yeah,
right?
He is still a politician.
Yeah.
And I heard him being interviewed. Maybe it was on the Today program or something, and that's how he talks all the time. He talks like a politician all the time, and he knows he's smart enough to understand what he's getting into. So I don't think, the line that I got, which was really interesting, was someone from The Standard wrote to me the day after, going something like, "Oof, we're all trying to work out how the freezer bags line got out of the building." And this person...
explain to our listeners what that line is.
Oh, sorry. So I say that he'd exclaimed that he wouldn't rest until Theresa May was in bags, chopped up in bags in his freezer.
Which recently got made into a rap song.
Yeah, and has taken on a life of its own.
Yeah.
That one line has it was so... When the day the piece came out, both Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May were being asked questions about it. And I was like, this is the strangest sort of post-publication experience I've ever had. This one line just took on this life of its own. Anyway.
Understandably.
But someone said to me, so this email says, we're trying to work out how that line got out the building. And I was thinking, that is not someone who is actually interested just as a sort of fellow journalist and reader. That's someone who's been asked by George Osborne
to find the
to find the leaker. There was a leak inquiry from the Evening Standard. That was really funny.
Can we move? We don't have that much time left, but to talk about books, and also about the ship piece. But could you how did your book writing career sort of develop in parallel to this?
The book writing career was really important for the magazine career because it allowed me to leave my Sunday Times contract. So I had this idea for this book about running, 2 hours, which it became. And I had tried with not much luck to get UK publishers interested. Basically a work of narrative nonfiction about, Kenyan and Ethiopian runners. And there had been some interest, but not very much. And my agent took it to New York, met someone from Simon & Schuster who read it on his subway ride home and got off the subway and called her and said, I want to make an offer right now. It was a really good offer, preempt. And with that bit of money, I decided I was going to leave the Sunday Times and be a freelance, totally freelance magazine journalist. Without that, it would have been really hard for me to do it. My first kid was on the way. And my wife gently questioned whether it was the best time to be completely cutting ties with someone who was paying me regular money. But yeah, I got that book. So the book deal was really important in fostering the magazine work, and was also just a brilliant educational experience in its own right. And my life is a constant battle between the impulse to drop all my magazine work and just write books, and the other way around. In fact, they've kind of work okay together, except I've got to do a second draft of my second book, and I can't really think where I'm going to get 2 or 3 months to, sit in a room and do that, because I've got all this. I'm really busy with magazine work. So, but they somehow collide in that way.
I think a writer once, Nick Pitt from the Sunday Times once described you as imagining you in the field, nailed down by every fact, bashing out words on a typewriter with a cigarette smouldering in your mouth.
I've never done that.
How do you write?
On a Dell laptop attached to a massive projector. Not a projector. Whatever it's called. A monitor. It's big.
Yeah. Do you write in kind of bursts or 9 to 5?
No, I try and start as early as possible, and I'm much better in the morning than I am in the afternoon. So I tend to break up my day. If I'm working on a draft, I try and go, if I can, depending on childcare and other things, I try to do something like 8 to 12 in the morning, then I run for an hour, then I have something to eat, and then in the afternoon I try to do other bits of reporting, a bit of admin, and then I'll try and look at what I've written between about 5 and 6.
I was going to ask, where does exercise kind of fit into your writing method?
Middle of the day.
You've written about so many topics, sport, you obviously write profiles about politics, war. Is there any subject, such as music, for instance, that you don't feel comfortable writing about?
No, weirdly, it's the stuff that I love most that I tend to shy away from. I adore music and used to do it a lot, and listen to it all the time, and just have a huge, endless urge to listen to lots of different kinds of music and go and see stuff, although I don't see as much stuff as I'd like to, and I've hardly ever written about it. Partly because it's really hard to write about music, I think, successfully. There are some people who do it really well.
What fraction of your work now is your ideas, and what fraction is stuff that editors have brought to you?
Quite a lot is mine. The Aaron Banks profile that I just did for the New Yorker was not my idea. Although, as soon as someone said at the magazine, you fancy profiling Aaron Banks? I thought, that sounds amazing.
How much work are you rejecting?
A lot, quite a lot, yeah. Because I only get to do a certain amount of stuff.
Yeah, do you recommend other writers when you turn down a piece?
I have done. I don't always do. Yeah, I mean, I think most people have a really good idea of, most people who are asking you to do something have a really good idea of who they would ask next.
And what's your bandwidth? What do you think your kind of yearly output of stories is?
4 big stories, I don't know. Absolute maximum. Depends whether you're going to do book work as well. Sometimes, I never used to do this at all, but I find myself sometimes now doing much shorter pieces. Like someone will call you up from like an airline magazine and say, would you give me 500 words on something? And it'll just happen to be in a week when you're reporting something, or you have got a little bit of give in your schedule. And sometimes I quite like doing that. It feels like sort of stretching, or it feels good. It feels really fun to write something and it goes in a magazine. And
I suppose these commercial magazines do well.
Yeah, I mean, it's quick and dirty, but it's not unsatisfying. I did this little series for Wired as part of a magazine deal about just me training for a half marathon, and there were about 1,200 to 1,500 words, those pieces, and I absolutely loved doing that. In a way, I wish I had some kind of bi-weekly thing that I could write, because I don't write enough. Most of my work is not writing.
Have you ever regretted a piece?
No, not. And it's. I mean, you regret the way you approach stuff. No, I haven't regretted a whole piece. Well, I don't know. I wrote a piece about the avocado, the sort of cultural history of the avocado for the Independent ones, which I think at the time struck me as quite sort of cleverly turned, 2,000 words, in about 2 hours. I think if I were to look at that now, along with a raft of other stuff that I did on very tight deadlines, I think I might actually, like the interior screaming would be too deafening. So
that was before the avocado became basic.
Exactly. Hashtag basic.
We better not end on a negative.
No.
I was going to say, I had two final questions. Do you sort of integrate with this increasing overplay of film and TV and long form writing? And the second was, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years?
Well,
I heard the former thing described as the caper industrial complex.
I'm not in the caper industrial complex. However, someone is making one of my pieces into TV, like at the moment.
Can you say which one?
Yeah, the Belle Possinger story is being, I think, reimagined. I think they want to do a sort of TV show in the world of, PRs. Quite a cool idea, but they bought the option off me.
Is that happening more and more? I've read more about
people do that.
Yeah.
I would actually love to write some TV, and I think that, when I came out of university and was trying to write screenplays, they were not very good screenplays because I didn't know anything. And I know a little bit more now, and I think it would be quite fun to occasionally, have a 3 or 4 month period where you just try to do something different. I think it's really helpful to write in different modes.
Working with dialogue as well, I guess.
It's working with dialogue, it's scenes, and I do, so I try and have scenes in my stories, but it's not, it's just a different thing, and it'd be really fun. I think, I was really interested. I was listening to Michael Lewis, who's an incredible writer in magazines and books.
I've just read The Fifth Risk.
Yeah, he's so good, and he
says he wants to write TV. Right?
Yeah, he writes a screenplay after every book, and none of them have ever been made because he's still getting better at it. And I was like, that's just such a cool thing. He stretches his legs in a different medium where he's not the top dog, and I guarantee it has a positive impact on the way that he writes magazine stories and books.
And the second thing about where you'd like to be in 5 or 10 years?
I don't know. I'm doing the thing that I want to do. So hopefully people can keep on letting me do that. The industry doesn't completely implode. That'd be quite fun.
I think that's a sufficiently positive note to end on.
So.
Ed, thank you for being such a star guest, and wishing you all the very best with your projects going forward.
Thanks so much.
Hello, it's us again. So to explain, as we alluded to before, we've spent the evening backstage at the British Book Awards, where we've been hopefully scouting some new exciting guests for the podcast, and they've given us a room where we can record this intro. But Ellie, of who we've seen tonight, who are you interested in getting on the show?
I would love to get Sally Rooney on the show. She won the Best Overall Book of the Year, which is amazing since she was up against Michelle Obama for Becoming. I think she's brilliant. I love Normal People and Conversation with Friends. Conversation with Friends more. Simon, have you read any of her work?
I'm going to confess I have not, but if she comes on the show, I will.
can lend you.
Thank you.
Her work.
I also saw David Walliams and Jay Rayner, so I'll be handcuffing them to lampposts later unless they agree to come on the show.
Gosh, please don't.
That's a joke. And we should also have like a brief post-mortem of the Ed Caesar interview, and particularly his pink shirt. What did you think of Ed Caesar's pink shirt?
He looked very good in his pink shirt.
Obviously, this is not a visual medium, but we can explain that he was accomplished magazine writer Ed Caesar was wearing a pink shirt,
which he was quite proud of himself, and he was influenced. Was it by Lukaku?
Romelu Lukaku, yeah. Who's a footballer, Ellie.
Yes, I know that. Who was wearing his kit is pink, isn't it? His new kit is pink.
Interesting. Anyway, we're going to draw this more experimental banter to a swift end. This has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acombe.
And me, Eleanor Halls.
Our producer is Nicola Keane. Our social media is handled by Zara Hankia, and our score is by Jess Danheiser. If you've enjoyed the show, you can support us on Patreon.
You've missed out Twitter and Instagram.
I'm also
but no one follows us on Instagram anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah, God, let's end this terrible car crash of a banter section.
I had one glass of wine. Okay, all right.
Thank you, and goodbye.
You.